He quickly realized that hanging out with Lilly meant being introduced to every food vendor in town. She moved quickly from place to place, just stopping long enough to introduce him and ask if they needed help. They were at San Myshuno Park when they struck gold. Motioning to the trash behind the stall, the vendor handed them both a plate for the promise that they would haul it off closer to the end of their shift. They settled down to eat at one of the tables in front of the vendors. Their plates were empty before Lily spoke again. "Okay, you mentioned laundry back in the alley. What were you asking about?" "Well, seeing as how there is a shower there already, and you can grow plants, I thought if we planted flowers, we could wash our clothes in them to make them smell nice." "Huh," Lily said. "Won't it stain them, though?" Zayden looked down at his old stained brown shirt, then back up at Lily, raising his eyebrows comically. Lily began giggling and looked down at her own clothes. "Yeah, you might have a point. You know, you don't say much, Zayden, but you sure get your point across. I mean, even if it doesn't, we could always use some flowers to make the alley look a little nicer." Zayden nodded in agreement. "I mean, if we can get ahead of our stomachs, I think we could really fix it up without being noticed." "Oh, definitely," Lily said, "although staying ahead of my stomach has been a full-time job. Speaking of stomachs, while ours are still full, how about I show you where some of my dumpster diving spots are?" Zayden nodded and stood following Lily again. He could not help but be slightly in awe of how easily she was trusting him. He understood now why the night before Bill had given him such a fierce look. Half the people he had known back home would have taken complete advantage of her. He was busily vowing to never do such a thing in his head when she pulled him into another alley, this one much smaller than the one they had slept in the night before. "Ta-da!" she sang out, pointing. It actually was not that bad for an alley in a city. The dumpsters were lined up neatly against the walls, and for once the smell of rotting vegetation was mild. "I don't really see a lot of food in these," Lily said, "and I try to be quieter in here. But I do see stuff that with a permanent spot to stay we could use to fix up our alley." Opening a dumpster carefully so the lid did not slam open, she motioned at the one next in line, saying simply, "Go for it," then began hefting herself into the dumpster. He stared at her wiggling feet for a moment, shaking his head at her seemingly endless enthusiasm, before moving to the dumpster she had waved at. Lifting the lid, he was greeted with hot, dry air. Looking up and down the alley one more time, he lifted himself up to stare into the dusty, cluttered interior. Shifting aside the bags first, he looked for larger items that could be used for setting up a laundry line. And while he was not lucky enough to find any rope, he did find a few things that with cleaning he might be able to pawn. He was pulling himself back out when he heard Lily crowing with delight. "You are my lucky charm, Zayden, you really are." Looking over, he saw her waving a hammer in the air. "I found this and a wrench. Who would have thought this is what today would bring? Did you find anything good for the alley?" "Oh, no, but I did find a few things. I think I can clean it and maybe pawn for something." Lily nodded enthusiastically. "Ooh, pawn shops. You know how to use them?" "Yeah, of course. How can you—" "Oh, never mind." The fact that she might have forgotten surfaced too late. She grinned. "It's fine. Maybe I was rich in the past." Zayden smiled in agreement. "Yeah, like a millionaire or something." Glancing at the sky, she said, "Well, we better head back to the park. Looks like it's getting close to its closing time." After they had carried the trash off for the vendor, he gestured them over. "So, now that it is slow, who are you?" he asked. "Oh, I'm Zayden Talus," sticking his hand out. It was just ignored. "Well, we vendors see everything in this city, and Lily is one of us whether she knows it or not." "Oh, Cletus," Lily said, rolling her eyes. "No, really, Lily, how well do you know this guy?" His voice echoing with concern. Zayden was beginning to feel awkward. "Look, I'm new to town, and Lily—" She interrupted him. "Okay, really, Cletus, stop it. You're freaking him out." Cletus stared at Zayden for a minute in silence, then nodded his head. "Fine, but just remember not to mess with her." Reaching underneath his counter, he pulled up a bag. "This is just some leftovers from the shift. Can't be fresh made if it was made the day before. Enjoy, Lily." "Zayden," he said, nodding at him again before pulling the door of the stand closed behind him. "Hope you have a good night. I'm headed home." Lilly watched him walk away, her face clearly not happy. "I wonder what his problem was," she said, glancing at Zayden, then shaking her head. "Come on, we should head to the alley." She immediately began walking away, head down. Zayden knew exactly what Cletus's problem was. He saw a guy, competition, where Lilly just saw a friend. Not that being a friend was a problem for Zayden. She put him in mind of his little sister. Of course, that immediately called to mind his reason for being alone in a city. Shaking his head at himself, he called out, "Wait up, Lilly," jogging over to catch up.